I'm going in.
Adapting this seminal but esoteric manga classic was always going to be a difficult and delicate task. A deft hand would certainly be required to ensure the remake was not only faithful to the original but also accessible to the Western mainstream in order to recoup its vast production budget. So putting this adaptation in the hands of Rupert Sanders, a director whose only notable effort to date is the rather dour Snow White and the Huntsman, probably wasn't the most prudent appointment, and his lack of conviction and confidence here means the film falls between two stools. 2017's Ghost in the Shell isn't so much a disappointment, but a mishandled movie that borders on being a disaster at times. Not only does it seemingly and fundamentally misunderstand many of the sentiments and subtext of the original, but it also struggles to find its own identity and can't help but cast itself constantly in the unfavourable light of comparisons against far greater films.
Maybe next time you can design me better.
The opening scene is indicative of Ghost in the Shell's copycat nature, as Scarlett Johansson's body lays lifeless on a laboratory slab as a new consciousness awakes inside it. It is instantly reminiscent of the introduction to Jonathan Glazer's masterful alien abduction oddity, Under the Skin, that other film where Scarlett spent a lot of time without many clothes on. And such a nostalgic experience permeates throughout the rest of the running time, and always to this remake's detriment. Next up, the film tries its hand at recreating the actual opening scene of the 1995 anime with mixed results. Sure, some fans will get a kick out of this live-action tracing of the original animation, and even the uninitiated will realise when the film is directly channeling the scenes from its predecessor, since these shot-for-shot recreations are markedly better composed and choreographed than when the film tries to do its own thing. In fact, it tries this approach several times, and while it's always impressive to see such things realised in the flesh, this is the Zack Snyder school of filmmaking, where it recreates its illustrated source material verbatim in live action. The issue with this slavish reverence is that it's akin to a school kid copying the answers to a test they haven't revised for. Yes, the answers may look right, but that kid doesn't understand why they are correct. And this does seem to be the case with Sanders' direction, as he clearly loves the look of the original, but his answer to the question of whether he understood it remains sketchy throughout.
Everyone around me, they feel connected to something.
The opening to the original Ghost in the Shell felt like the opening of a James Bond film, where you were dropped into the middle of a scene with little explanation of who anyone is or what's at stake, and there's absolutely no reason why the same approach wouldn't have worked here, but the creative team, and I do use that term lightly, are determined to normalise proceedings as much as possible here. The treatment for this update really should have been It's Mission Impossible, written by the brainchild of Philip K. Dick and William Gibson, and instead what we get is Jason Bourne as Robocop running around the set of Blade Runner. Speaking of which, much like the anime original, Ridley Scott's 1982 sci-fi noir casts a very long shadow over the production design of this update. Many have been full of praise for the film's beautifully realised visuals, but you can have too much of a good thing. And the lack of restraint in deploying all of this expensive CGI does occasionally look like an augmented reality app has thrown up all over Tokyo. The similarities with Blade Runner are not just superficial either, with the film's occasional attempts at dealing with some existential matters as Johansson's cyborg wrestles with her new identity. In one scene, the lead character hires a human sex worker just to ask her how it feels to be touched, and it's very nearly affecting. But this flicker of emotion quickly becomes a faint memory as the narrative gets back on with its boilerplate sci-fi conspiracy plot where the one-dimensional villain wants to erase the insurgent synthetic beings of his creation. This leads to the climactic spider tank set piece that was so memorable in the original, but anyone hoping for the evocative artistry of this scene from the anime will be sorely disappointed by this haphazard conclusion that tries and fails to crowbar in a meaningful relationship between Johansson's lead and another cyborg. This culminates in a payoff line that's so cheesy you probably shouldn't attempt to drive home from the theatre, as you'll be rolling your eyes for several hours after such a hackneyed resolution. And that's if you even get that far into proceedings, since on top of all of Ghost in the Shell's many failings, its biggest problem is that the film becomes such a crashing bore which runs out of steam long before it reaches the end of its 2-hour running time. It was inevitable that the original's meagre 80 minutes would need expanding, but filling all that extra time with nothing but cliches and incidental scenes suggests that not only did the filmmakers not understand what the original had to say, but they also had nothing new to say themselves.
Everything they told you was a lie.
Who are you?
Throughout this expensive cinematic sludge, however, there is one saving grace, and that would be Johansson in the title role of Major. While hardly her best work by any stretch of the limited imagination on show here, there is simply no better A-list actress at carrying a sci-fi film almost single-handedly. Of course, much controversy surrounded her casting, with some believing the role should have been filled by a Japanese actress, but on the most part this just doesn't bear out, as the cast is genuinely international and multicultural throughout the film. Indeed, one of the many subtexts of the original was that international borders had been made almost irrelevant by such advanced computer networks, and so it seems in the remake as well. But then it is revealed towards the end of the film that the ghost in the Major's shell is actually of Japanese ethnicity, which again demonstrates how overwhelmingly tone deaf in almost every regard this adaptation is. This scene could have been used magnificently as either commentary on Hollywood whitewashing or potentially gone to character in terms of how much humanity has been stripped from the Major. But the scene is so devoid of self-awareness and consequence that drawing either of those conclusions is entirely undeserved by the film itself. Basically, it's a ham-fisted attempt at adding ultimately meaningless characterization, and it results in completely undermining the justification for a controversial casting decision. This pretty much sums up the whole uncoordinated nature of this pointless endeavour. And as such, 2017's Ghost in the Shell remains embarrassingly oblivious to its own inherent irony. It's a remake of a film that raised so many perennially pertinent and existential questions, and yet this live-action version can only muster one. Why does this film even exist?